The first style I'd like to talk about is rock. Now, when we talk about styles, there are quite a few different styles, but it goes well beyond that. It's kind of like languages. There's a few thousand languages, but then there's a few thousand more dialects. So in the same thing with styles, you have your main styles, but there's a whole bunch of dialects of those styles. If you take rock, for example, you got progressive rock, fusion rock, you start getting some jazz in there and some Latin, and you get all these different hybrids of rock. So what we're going to do is just going to discuss the straight ahead rock that's more of in a pop type setting. And yeah, let's get started with our first example. On our first example, you can see it starts with the bass drum and it goes snare, floor tom. Now with that, you want to lead with the left hand on the snare to the floor tom. Because if you do this, it's a little bit more complicated and harder to get. So you want to do that. You want to get into left hand lead, right hand lead. You don't want to be limited that way. So 2 bass drums, snare, floor tom, 2 bass drums, and he goes first tom twice, second tom twice, 2 bass drums, flam on the snare, and crash. So I'll play just the fill for you, nice and slow. Now a little faster. Now we'll do it in a musical sitting. So on this next rock example, again, we're starting with 2 bass drums, 2 floor toms, 2 bass drums, 4 of the first tom, 2 bass drums, crash with the snare, and then bass drum by itself. So it goes like this, slowly. And now in a rock setting. Now for this next example, we have accents on the floor tom, on the downbeat, and on the ah. So it goes 1, E, and ah, and then 2 bass drums. Then it goes floor tom, snare for 4, 4 on the first tom. Now with this, I'm going to lead the latter part with the left hand because it makes more sense for me when I have the 2 hits on the floor tom to come over to the snare like this, and then up to the first tom, as opposed to leading with the right and then having my left down and then having to come in quickly with the right. So I'm going to lead with my left at that part, and you can lead with your right, interchange them. Ideally, we should be able to lead with both hands. That way, it'll create even more freedom behind the kit. So this one, I'm going to lead with the left, and I'll play you the fill just by itself. Keep in mind with the accents, to make it easier to produce them, you want to have a higher stick height, okay? The higher the stick height, the bigger the sound. So as you do your accent, lift your stick up to produce it. So here's just the fill. Now in a rock setting. Now in this next fill, we got 16th, 8th, 16th, 8th, 16th, 8th, and then 8ths. Right hand on the snare, first tom, floor tom, and then it reverses the tom sequence. Floor tom, first tom, snare, then 3 on the first tom, da da da, flam on the snare, crash with the snare. So just the fill goes like this. Now I'll do it with a beat. Now in a rock context. You'll notice in that fill, I hit the crash with the snare on the end of 4 and then didn't hit a crash coming back into the beat. For me, that was just a musical decision at the time. Sometimes I do 2 crashes and it has a bigger release and stuff. But for now, I just felt just having that extra emphasis on the end set up the one better. And you don't want to get caught into a religious thing where you always have to have a crash on the downbeat every time. You know, sometimes it's just nice to do a fill without a crash. A crash really helps segue the fill back into the beat, just kind of smooths things out a bit. So I liked having that left on the end by itself, it emphasizes it more. When you have more crashes together, each individual crash will have less emphasis. If you have one crash, obviously more emphasis. So that's why I chose just to put that one crash in there. It's just an emotional decision. Now, our next fill example, I actually need to turn to it here, is the flam on the snare, 2 bass drums, flam on the floor tom, 2 bass drums, flam on the first tom, 2 bass drums, and then it's second tom and snare together. So 16th, 8th, 16th, 8th, 16th, 8th, and then 2 8ths. So it goes like this. So I'll do that just a little bit slower. Now I'll play with the beat. One thing I want to touch on too is with the flams, they make it for a thicker sounding note. So the wider you get, you can have even a thicker sound. If you get too wide, then it sounds like a 16th dotted eighth. So I'm going to play you some examples of just doing flams back to back. I'm going to slowly start opening them up so you can hear the difference, flams that you can do. So I'll start with real tight and then open them up. So at that one point, it gets really wide. You can actually hear each stroke, which is fine. It's just about, again, an emotional decision and a musical decision. So now let me show you that fill with the music.